a long-range ballistic missile, like an arrow from hell launched from the ungoverned borders of Yemen, pierced the night sky with a velocity that seemed to freeze time itself. Without mercy, the deadly projectile struck at the heart of Israel's ground power, the Merkava tank production center in the southern part of the nation that had long claimed unshakable strength. An earth-shattering explosion erupted at 3:42 a.m., shaking the ground and unleashing a mini-apocalypse of flames that devoured everything in its path. The facility, which for decades had been regarded as an impenetrable fortress, was now transformed into a sea of fire. Military officials who were once arrogant could now only watch helplessly at the total devastation, admitting in their own words that almost nothing remained. The production line that once delivered hundreds of Merkava tanks annually was now reduced to rubble and charred metal, like relics from an ancient military era that failed to survive in modern times. The sophisticated robotic machinery, once hailed as the pinnacle of Israeli military innovation, melted like wax in the inferno. The proud steel that generals once stroked with admiration had turned to ash. All that remained was irony and a piercing silence. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, usually bold and full of threats, was reportedly lost for words. He canceled all meetings, refused to eat, and sat frozen before a CCTV screen showing the destruction of the factory in footage resembling a documentary about the fall of an empire. The slogan "Israel is strong" now stood no firmer than the factory walls turned to dust. Usually, such attacks are followed by fury and steel-toned speeches. But this time, Netanyahu was silent. No press releases, no emergency address. Only a long silence, louder than missile sirens. The hashtags Merkava exploded and Anita Humancom erupted on social media, flooded with memes and global ridicule. TikTok users even commented, if Israel wants to build tanks again, maybe they should use cardboard and empty hope. One missile, but the impact equaled 5 decades of national therapy. Export production was completely halted. Hundreds of tanks under assembly were severely damaged. Partner countries began to reconsider. The Merkava tank, once a symbol of might, now looked more suitable for display in a contemporary art gallery, themed Broken Dreams. The military spokesperson tried to contain the fallout, blaming technical factors for the missiles slipping through the Iron Dome, a system long praised as a sky shield. But the public wasn't buying it. If Iron Dome is that great, how did a Yemeni missile enter like a guest at a wedding, wrote one user. Criticism flooded the government, exposing the illusion of power built over decades with hollow rhetoric. Now, it wasn't just a factory that had fallen. It was also a sense of safety, a sense of trust, and most bitterly, national pride. Some military analysts called it a turning point, a stark reminder that even colossal war machines can collapse with a single well-aimed blow, that the myth of invincibility is a story that can be burned away with a spark and precision. The fire raged for more than 9 hours. Firefighters were overwhelmed. 3 secondary explosions followed. The night sky turned orange. Smoke rose like the fumes of hell over the desert. Eyewitnesses said the blast shattered house windows 10 kilometers away. One resident said, "I thought the world was ending, but it was just the Merkava being obliterated." It wasn't just Israel that was shaken. Reports said the Pentagon was shocked too, since Iron Dome is a collaborative defense project. Leaked information revealed that America is now re-evaluating the effectiveness of its partners. Israel, the West's youngest military sibling, had lost face. The world began to ask if even the tank production center can be destroyed then, where is Israel truly safe? Yemen itself issued no official statement. But an armed group suspected to be behind the strike circulated a digital leaflet bearing an insulting message: "We are just sending greetings, this is only the first one." The world trembled. Would the next missile strike the military command center, an oil refinery, or head straight for the heart of Tel Aviv? The people of Israel were gripped by anxiety. Citizens began lining up to buy gas masks and canned food. Airline ticket sales surged. They feared not just the next missile, but the failure of their nation to protect them. No words could bring comfort except stale, empty promises. Zionist supporters abroad are divided. Some liberal Jewish figures wrote in opinion columns that Israel is no longer the safest place on earth. Security think tanks began releasing pessimistic reports that public trust in military technology has collapsed entirely. Even the backup systems failed to respond on time. The Merkava factory is not just a building. It is a symbol, a representation of might, a myth. That myth has now burned, destroyed, erased. What remains is the question: is Israel truly prepared to face an unconventional war? Or is this merely the beginning of a greater collapse? Meanwhile, in the mountains of Yemen, a group of armed fighters reportedly celebrated with flatbread and laughter. They named the missile the Angel of Reminder, a reminder that behind strength lies weakness, that no matter how thick the wall, it can be brought down if the weak spot is found, that the greatest enemy is not outside, but within, behind arrogance. The world is witnessing a new chapter, where a small, poor, and blockaded country can throw the most heavily armed nation into disarray, where a single strike can flip the geopolitical map, where the fear that had long been Israel's weapon now turns inward, gnawing at the heart of its own state. The explosion was not just a missile blast. It was a blast of history, echoing from the desert to UN meeting rooms, slapping the face of global militarist arrogance, teaching that sometimes a small shard can topple a throne built from thousands of tanks. The explosion destroyed not just steel and concrete. It destroyed symbols. It shook myths. The Merkava tank factory, long hailed as the pride of Israel's military, now stands as proof that a power idolized for decades could be reduced to ashes overnight by a missile from a nation long underestimated. There is no more aura of superiority, no more technological pride. Only ash, dust, and total destruction remain. Eyewitnesses described the blast as dark magic from the sky. Its light split the night. The shockwave shook the heart of the near city. Even from dozens of kilometers away, the boom could be felt to the bone. Sirens wailed. The sky glowed red. House walls trembled as if in an earthquake. Children cried. Adults stood silent in horror. The technicians on duty that night, mostly young and newly recruited, had no chance to escape. Some were burned alive. Others were found in horrific condition, their remains fused with shards of metal and scattered engine debris. In Tel Aviv's war room, Israeli military generals gathered in silence. Normally, they spoke boldly, crafted strategies, issued instructions. But that night, only heavy sighs and blank stares were heard. No one expected a single missile from the south to cause such devastation. Their radar detected nothing. The Iron Dome system failed completely. One small gap, and the proudly touted defense crumbled instantly, like a sandcastle struck by a tsunami. Major global media rushed to report. Breaking news appeared in every language. The New York Times headlined it as Israel's worst night. BBC wrote Merkava factory now just a memory. Al Jazeera called the attack the greatest blow to Zionist military power since the Yom Kippur War. Even pro-Israel media could not hide the truth. This was not just an attack. It was a harsh slap to their entire defense doctrine. On social media, the world roared. Twitter exploded. TikTok flooded with parodies and satire. Netizens from across the globe mocked the failure of a defense system once claimed to be the most advanced. A user from Morocco wrote Merkava burned like satay on Eid al-Adha. Another from Iran quipped, "So that's your pride tank? Looks like it melts like ice cream." Even among Israeli netizens, many began to question where the hundreds of millions in military budget had gone. They demanded audits. They demanded explanations. They demanded heads to roll. It didn't take long for the world to realize this wasn't just a military attack. It was a geopolitical earthquake. Foreign investors began withdrawing capital from Israeli military firms. Export contracts were canceled. Countries that had previously ordered dozens of Merkava tanks have now frozen transactions. India has halted cooperation. Germany stated it would review the agreement. Even the United States, Israel's eternal ally, expressed concern and urged Israel to investigate the failure of its defense systems. Meanwhile, in Yemen, celebrations erupted. People flooded the streets, carrying flags and banners that read vengeance has been delivered. Houthi commanders gave fiery speeches, calling this a day of victory for the oppressed people over Zionist arrogance. Yemeni media repeatedly broadcast the explosion footage accompanied by heroic music. The missile was even given an honorary name, Al-Najm Az-Saqib, the star that pierces the sky. The Israeli government was in chaos. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu held a closed-door meeting that lasted over 7 hours. But the outcome was empty. The public continued to demand accountability. Demonstrations broke out in various cities. Thousands of people took to the streets, shouting, "We no longer believe." They carried replicas of Merkava tanks and burned them in the streets as a symbol of disappointment. In modern Israeli history, this was the most humiliating moment, not because they were attacked, but because they believed for too long that they could never be touched. The impact rippled through every sector. Israel's stock market plunged. The value of the shekel dropped drastically. The military industry was paralyzed. Thousands of workers were laid off. Reserve components ran out. There was no alternative distribution route. Insurance companies refused to cover losses, calling the attack a high-level force majeure. The government had to pour trillions of shekels just to patch the damage. But even that was not enough. Public trauma could not be bought with money. Most distressing of all, the families of the victims demanded justice. They blamed the military for placing a vital factory in such a vulnerable area. They accused the government of completely failing to protect national assets. At the mass funeral of young technicians, grief mixed with anger. A mother wailed, "You promised my son would be safe in the factory, but he came home in a body bag." Meanwhile, the international community was divided. Some countries condemned the attack as an escalation of conflict, but most called it a legitimate blow against military ambitions that had long fueled regional tension. Analysts called it a turning point, not only in the Israel-Yemen conflict, but in the entire military landscape of the Middle East. For the first time in history, a small nation with limited technology managed to penetrate the defense of one of the most heavily armed countries in the world and win. Israel, long standing as a giant, now collapsed as a burning legend. The Merkava factory did not merely represent physical destruction. It became a monument to the failure of arrogant militaristic civilization. Every puff of smoke rising from the ruins of that factory carried a message: no power is eternal. Even the strength of steel can be defeated by the burning will of the oppressed. And from those ruins, a new global narrative was born, a narrative of equality. That dominance can be challenged. That power does not always equate to truth. The Yemeni missile was not just a weapon. It was a message. It was a reminder that even in a world gripped by war machines, a flicker of courage from an unexpected direction can change everything. In the shadows of the still smoldering wreckage, the world witnessed a new chapter in military history written in ink of fire and the sound of wailing sirens. But for the Israeli military elite, this wound was more than physical. It was an injury to dignity. For the first time since the founding of their nation, the very thing they were most proud of, the Merkava tank, the unshakable symbol of Israeli ground power, was stripped bare by a single missile from the sky. Unstoppable, and with no direct retaliation possible. The damage was not only to the factory infrastructure, but also to the blueprint of power. The central military control room became a labyrinth of uncertainty. Surveillance satellites were rechecked. The Iron Dome system underwent massive internal investigation. Technicians were grilled. Software was scrutinized. Everything felt futile, because reality had spoken louder than any theory. For the first time, public opinion in Israel could no longer be restrained by propaganda. The people began to ask themselves, if we can be attacked like this, then who can protect us? If our tanks can be bombed in their own factories, then what guarantee is there that our children are safe at home? That fear spread faster than anything. It crept into schools, offices, hospitals. The civil protection system was pushed to its limits, but pressure only gave birth to new fears. Inside military headquarters, divisions emerged within the armed forces. Factions that once stood united behind the banner of superiority began blaming each other. The Air Force accused ground defenses of being slow. Intelligence blamed early detection failures. The factory commanders blamed the lack of information from Central Command. Everyone spoke, but no one listened. All that remained was internal noise that drowned out the voices of the people outside. We no longer believe. Meanwhile, from behind the mountains of Yemen, Houthi military engineers did not hide their euphoria. They showcased a new missile system that they claimed could reach other strategic points in the heart of Israel. The world once doubted their technical capabilities, but after the Merkava incident, the skeptical voices vanished like morning mist under the sun. Now they're seen not only as bold, but also effective. And more terrifying still, they are not finished. Israel now faces a deadly dilemma. They want to retaliate, but cannot act recklessly. A massive counterattack could spark a wider regional war. The United States has warned Israel to show restraint. Europe has called for de-escalation. Even Gulf countries that had previously normalized relations with Israel have fallen silent. No one wants to be dragged into a fire that is growing larger. And in the midst of it all, the international community watches with awe, fear, and hope, realizing that power is no longer the monopoly of those with stealth jets and smart bombs. A new world has been born. A world where determination, guerrilla strategy, and unexpected innovation can cripple dominance. That Yemeni missile, in a single blast, destroyed more than just buildings. It shattered perception. It is no wonder that now many smaller countries are re-evaluating their defense strategies. Nations in Africa, South Asia, and Latin America are beginning to pay serious attention to medium-range tactical missile technology. They are learning from Yemen. They see hope, because for them, if Yemen can bring down a giant like Israel, then maybe one day they too can free themselves from dependence on major powers. The rise of this anti-hegemony spirit is becoming a global domino effect. At the UN, voices that were once silent are now speaking loudly. Developing countries are demanding investigations into Israel's military policies. They reject dictation. They urge nuclear disarmament. They call for equality in defense technology. The world no longer sees Israel as invincible. The world is beginning to see it as one of many nations that must now bow to a new reality. Most striking of all is the change in attitude among Arab countries. Although not all speak loudly, there's a clear shift. They are beginning to respect Yemen, a country long marginalized, torn by civil war, and underestimated. Now, Yemen has become a symbol of courage. Even Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank are calling this attack a path opener for broader resistance, a momentum that does not come twice in a generation. More than that, several resistance groups in Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq are aligning themselves with what they call the axis of victory. They see the destruction of the Merkava factory as a divine sign that their time has come. The call to jihad is no longer just ritual, but is fueled by tangible proof that their enemy is not a god, that the war machines can burn, that the armor can tear, that they, who were long portrayed as losers, now hold the torch of hope. This is where the greatest explosion from the Yemeni missile lies, not on the ground, not in steel, but in the human soul. It burns away the fear that has long bound them. It reignites the fire of belief that the fight against oppression is never in vain. Even if it takes years of suffering, destruction, and loss, there will come one night, one light in the sky, that changes everything. And that night has come.